Hello and welcome to this complete beginner wood carving lesson. In this lesson we are going to talk about everything you need to know about V-tools to get started using them. So we're going to cover 5 things in this video. First of all, why you would even want to use a V-tool. Second, names and types of V-tools. Third, how to use a V-tool. Fourth, how to keep a V-tool sharp. And then finally, some recommendations as you think about purchasing your own. So first we're going to talk about why you would even use a V-tool, and I would say that having a V-tool is probably the first tool I would recommend outside of a knife if you are getting into whittling and wood carving. The reason for that is just the ease of use and the wealth of opportunities it gives you to try some different things. So I want to show you a few examples of things you can do, easily with a V-tool. So this is an example Easter egg, and this was carved just using the V-tool on top of a painted egg like that. You can make very clean, simple lines, and that's one advantage of using them. Very similarly, on this tree, it's a similar kind of thing. I can carve straight, simple lines. I can texture the trunk using the tool, and I could make those cuts with a knife, but it would be much more difficult to make them as clean and effective. The stump is another good example. Another great example is hair or beards. So here's an example of one of my gnomes, and these texture on the beard is all carved with a V-tool. Hair is a good example. Here's a simple wood spirit, and actually that's going to be the next video, is to learn how to carve one of these, and that's done almost entirely with a V-tool for all of those faces and hair and things. And then another example would be on a more complex kind of wood spirit. This is done with a series of different V-tools, a larger one to get bigger shapes and a smaller one to get more detail. You also use a V-tool on here for cuts like the top of the eyebrow here. So plenty of things that you can do with a V-tool, and it really expands your skill set from the knife. So next we're going to talk about names and types of V-tools. So first of all, I'm using the term V-tool. Some people use the term V-parting tool, but I think it's simplest to call it a V-tool. Sometimes you might even hear them referred to as a numbered gouge, like a number 12 or something, because if you're familiar with the gouge naming system, an 11 would be a U, and then sometimes it's named beyond that. But in general, I'm going to refer to them as a V-tool. You'll hear V-parting tool as well commonly. So there are a few different ways that V-tools are described. And so the first one is based on the angle. So a V-tool is, in its essence, 2 sharp edges coming together into a V shape, right? And so it's kind of like having two knives come together, or their broad edges come together into the shape of a V. The first way that they're defined, and I can see if I can get that tip of that to focus in for you at all, but the first way that they're defined is by the angle. So the angle refers to what angle is made when those 2 edges come together. Okay, and this is a 60 degree V tool, a little bit less than 90 degrees. You can hopefully see there. But you could get wider or narrower ones as well. So that's an example of a 60 degree V-tool. This one is 90 degrees. You can see that one a little better because it's a little bigger. Just a straight up 90 degree angle. You can get narrower ones, wider ones. So this one is a 75 degree one. I believe these flex cut ones are generally 70 degrees. You can get narrower ones down to 45. I think I've seen them as narrow as 30 or as wide as 120. But that's the first way they're described, is by the angle. The second way they're described is by the size, which is really just the the width of the tool, right? So this one is a, quarter inch, quarter inch 60-degree V tool. Okay, and so it's a quarter inch wide, and the angle that it makes is 60 degrees. This one, as you can see, is a 3 millimeter, and it is a 90-degree. Boy, it's hard to get those to focus, but it's a 90-degree. You can take my word for it. 3 millimeter tool. So angle number one, width number two, and then a couple other things that you might hear about in naming these. One is a soft V versus a true V. So you can see this well on this really big one here, which is that instead of coming to an exact point, this one comes to kind of a soft curve on the bottom. So it's almost like a little bit of a U shape on the bottom instead of a hard V. This one is similar to that as well. Okay, so that's what's referred to as a soft V, because instead of being a sharp point at the bottom, they're kind of rounded off on the bottom. Again, you contrast that to a couple of these, which are a true V or a hard V, where they come together to a true point right at the bottom. Okay, and then the last thing you might hear is that straight versus bent. So this would be an example of a straight. All of these that I have on the table are an example of a straight. Here's an example of a bent one, where you can see the angle of the tool is actually bent as it goes forward. That's used to get into different to reach places. It's easier to maybe get in and scoop out, or different applications. So that's how you would name them: angle, size, and things like that. All right. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use your V tool. So really quickly and simply, you're just going to push the V tool in, and it's going to make a V cut like that. Now, again, you could take a knife and you could do two cuts together to do that with a knife, but it's simpler with a V tool. And you're just going to kind of push it in, go along, and then lift it up to come out. Okay. A couple things to note with the V tool. I'm doing 3 different cuts here intentionally. This one here is kind of going with the grain. The grain's going vertically here. This one is obviously going straight across the grain. And then this last one is going sideways. Well, one important thing to understand when you're using a V tool in order to make clean cuts is that with the V tool, you're always cutting against the grain one way or the other. So think about this as we think about this kind of diagonal cut. Let's say this is the wood grain there, and I'm making a cut kind of represented by that gap. Well, we talked before, when you want to cut with the grain, if I'm looking at the bottom fibers here, I would want to cut this way to be going with the grain going up, right? And to go on these, I would want to be cutting going this way to be with the grain going down, or to be carving uphill or downhill, depending on the way you think about it. So when I cut diagonally across the grain with a V tool, one side of the tool here is cutting with the grain, while the other side of the tool is simultaneously cutting against the grain. It's important to understand, because when you're cutting with a V tool, you're almost always cutting against the grain, one side of it, unless you're cutting purely straight along. And so you really want to keep these sharp, and you'll notice sometimes that the left side of this cut might come out cleaner than the right side of the cut. Well, what I would do then is I would just turn it around and maybe lean into that left side a little bit, and I could clean it up if I needed to. But if my tool's sharp, it's going to be able to handle it. But understanding that is key to be able to make clean, consistent cuts with your V tool. The last tip I'll give you is if you want to make an awkward cut. So let's say I want to make like a S curve like this. I'd recommend doing what I did here, which is not just trying to make one big deep cut, but to start small, and then I can follow that, make it deeper. Don't worry about making that cut a few different times if you need to. And what you'll see is I'm getting a little bit messy here. Well, that's a point where this side of the tool is starting to cut against the grain there. So if I want to clean that up, I can turn it around. I can lean into the left side there a little bit, and I can clean that up. Okay. So that's real quick, just some basic recommendations for how to use the V-tool. So the next one is to keep it sharp, and keeping your tool sharp is important, as I said, because you're almost always cutting against the grain one way or the other with a V-tool. So what I'm going to show you here is called a slip strop. This is from Flex Cut. You can get other versions of this, but the most common and easy one to find is this Flex Cut slip strop. And on one side of this, it looks just like a regular knife strop, and you can put your compound on here, you know, over the leather, and you could strap a knife or whatever on there. In order to strap my V-tools, what I'm going to do is I'm going to consider that two different edges that need to be stropped, right? So I'm going to lay the one edge flat, just like I would be on my knife. I'm going to pull it away from the tool, and again, I'm going straight down and straight up, so I'm not rounding it. Then I'm going to turn it to the other edge, and I'm going to strop it the same way, the same number of times as I did on the first edge. Okay, so I can strop that similarly to what I would do with the knife. Now, the difference is that to get the inside of this, I can't just like turn it around and do that. So what the slip strop does is it gives you a bunch of different profiles for V-tools and gouges to be able to strop. So you can apply compound to it just like this, because it's the compound that sharpens, not the leather, or in this case it's just going straight onto the wood. And then I can strop the inside edge by putting it on that V, and again just pulling it out. I always do this very lightly, and I only do it a few times after I've done the sides a lot more, because really you're just trying to make sure you don't have a rolled wire edge or something on the other side. You want to make sure you've cleaned that off of the inside. You don't really have to put another bevel on the inside the way you might be thinking if you were sharpening the bevel on the other side of a knife. Now, the only other thing I would add is if you're using something again like this, which is a soft V, that if you just strop this flat and flat, you're missing a good center chunk of that. So then you're going to do a thing like this where you're just going to strop it down the middle too. But otherwise you would do it basically the same. And you're going to strop your V-tools often. I strop my V-tools before I do something like this. I strop them. I always strop them before doing anything that I know is going to be a lot of difficult crosscuts, because I want them to be absolutely as sharp as possible. So the last thing I want to talk about is just a few recommendations if you're thinking about getting yourself a V-tool. And I'm going to show you a few tools that I'm going to make some general recommendations, because unlike the knives, there aren't as many different options, and it may depend on availability and things like that. So here are a number of different V-tools to think about. I'll start with these on the left here. These are Dockyard tools, and Dockyard makes these great micro tools. This 3mm size is actually the biggest one that they make, and you can get 2mm, 1.5mm, or this is a 75 degree, which is a little bit thinner. The regular ones are 90 degrees. This is a 90 degree. And these are great if you need something small, which you might want to start with, but might not be the best place to start unless you know that you're carving really, really small things. I do use this 3mm V to do almost all of the beard textures on my gnomes that are carved mostly out of 1x1, and it works really well for that size of thing. The next ones I have here are both from FlexCut, and FlexCut makes great, affordable and easy to find tools, so this might be a good recommendation for definitely the easiest one for you to find. This is a palm tool. I believe this is a 70 degree. I think their standard is 70 degree, and I want to say it's not quite a quarter. I think it's a well, yeah, about a 1/4 inch. Yeah, so that's a quarter inch 70 degree. That's a great one to start with. I would definitely recommend that. And then this is a micro version of the flex cut, and this is a 1.5 millimeter, which again, you probably don't need to start with unless you know you're doing really small things. These next two are both from OCC Tools. These two are both soft V's. That's good for hair or things like that when you don't need the sharp V down in the crevice. They both work very well. Maybe a little bit harder to find, but you can probably find OCC or more recently they're being referred to as KCT. They were bought recently. You can find those on different carving sites. And then these last few are from Drake, and the Drake V tools are fantastic. This is my go-to tool for almost everything. It is a 60-degree 1/4 inch, and it's just the perfect size balance. This is like a 1/2 inch, but it's a 90 degree, so it's a little bit wider. I use it for wider cuts, and then the smaller one is an 1/8 inch 60 degree. Now I'll tell you one thing to be aware of with the differences in some of these, and what I would say is a bit of a personal preference, but the flex cut tools, it's in their name, are made to flex. So when you push down against the wood, they flex. And in some ways that's really helpful. When you push them in, they'll come out kind of easily. In other instances, I find that I really prefer to have a more rigid tool. So especially when I'm making these cuts like this upper eyebrow, I really like a tool that's not going to flex because I'm carving that against the grain really delicately, and I prefer to have a really non-flexible tool for those kinds of cuts. You'll get comfortable with whatever tool you have, but what I would recommend if you're getting your first V tool would be something like probably one of these two. So something in the 1/4 inch range and probably a 60 to 90 degree angle. There are other brands you can get. These are just the ones that I have. Stubai, of course, File, Swiss Made, or Ramelson are common ones that you'll find. I think to start with, having something in the 1/4 inch range, 60 to 90 degrees is good. If you're going to go smaller, then I recommend the Dockyard tools, and starting off with the 3 millimeter V is a really great option there. So that's it. I'm hoping that you found that informative and helpful. And our next tutorial or project in this series is going to be using these V tools extensively. So thanks for watching, and happy woodworking.